Dr. David Perlmutter, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Gosh, it's been a while. I think last time you were on my show, maybe, I'm not sure. I know I visited your house here.
At some point in the past. Yeah. It's quite possible. You are one of my OG inspirations in this space. You were probably among my very first exposures to the concept, the wild and crazy concept that nutrition and lifestyle play a role when it comes to our brain health and our risk, our predilections for conditions like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. And so for that, I am forever indebted to you for that.
Well, thank you, Max. There are a lot of words you just used that I think are good launch points. Predilections is one, especially. People don't talk about it. The idea, and you mentioned nutrition and Alzheimer's. I mean, you know, as I came up, that was never a consideration. Now there's a journal of prevention of Alzheimer's, an actual journal. Can you imagine a peer-reviewed journal dedicated to the notion of keeping the brain healthy and reducing risk of what you and I have both gone through with a parent? So
it's crazy. And the tide has turned in such a profound way. I mean, I remember when I was first getting started in this space, the notion of dementia prevention was considered very fringe, like a very fringe idea. And now we have every 4 years the Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention. We've got this journal, as you referenced. It must be, from your vantage point, especially, quite breathtaking to behold.
Yeah, and it's a bit validating for sure, because like you say, years ago, we were definitely even worse than being the odd man out. It was the, castigation and derogation behind your back kind of stuff that, this stuff is BS. Why are you talking about it? We need to wait for somebody to have an issue and then try to create something to help with that issue. And that's perverse. I'm sorry. I didn't know I was going to come out swinging like this, but I think we're in the same camp. That the Yellow Emperor in the 4th century BC said that prevention is the ultimate principle of wisdom. To cure a disease after it has manifest is like digging a well when one feels thirsty or forging weapons when the war has already begun. And that's sort of been the mantra of Western medicine. Live your life however you choose, and then when things start going south, why we're, modern medicine with all wonderful, developments, we'll fix it for you. And it has just fallen so short as it relates to Alzheimer's and, really across the spectrum of neurodegenerative conditions. We've got nothing to treat the underlying issue, the fire, and yet we concentrate on the smoke. Like in Parkinson's, we can treat the tremor and rigidity, but there's nothing until quite recently that actually attacks the underlying metabolic issue that affects the immune system that leads to any manner of neurodegenerative condition, no matter what you want to call it.
Across the catalog of chronic conditions that people are now struggling with en masse, why do you think Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative chronic conditions, why approaching them from the standpoint of prevention is so important?
Good question, and the answer is actually simple, and that might be surprising for you, but the reason is we now fully understand that these are ultimately metabolic issues, and the reason things are getting so much worse with time across the spectrum of everything you describe is because our metabolism is getting worse and worse with time, globally, not just in America. And metabolism, through the notion of immunometabolism, metabolism affects the immune system, which is what our discussion is about today. And as we disrupt our metabolism, the brain's metabolism is disrupted, its immune cells are disrupted, and that leads the door open to any number of neurodegenerative conditions. So interestingly, what I just said is that we've now converged an understanding of all neurodegenerative conditions as opposed to beta amyloid for Alzheimer's and alpha-synuclein for Parkinson's and what have you. Okay, well, what are the brain degenerative conditions in which we don't have a misfolded protein? Well, the frontotemporal dementia and multisystem atrophy, PSP, ALS, all the initials that they throw at you. Having said that, what an incredible time we're in now that everything has converged on a central mechanism. Disruption of the brain's immune system is the upstream event in all of these conditions. caramba, as I guess Bart Simpson would say, right?
Yeah, I caramba. So if you were starting from zero today, what are the first 3 things that you would do to protect your brain for the next 30 years?
Well, for me, I would say it would be take a step back and recognize, A, that you can do it. That's the most important first step. Without that first step, then nothing else matters because you won't do the other things. But I think that it's anything you can do. I know you want me to get it down to 3, but anything that you do that targets metabolism, and you know the big levers, it's eat, it's sleep, and it's activity. Those are the big 3, and it's been done already. I mean, even treating existing Alzheimer's patients by modifying their lifestyle, by modifying what they eat, their activity, their physical connectedness to others, and reducing their stress. That was a study done by Rudolph Tanzi and Dean Ornish, and published, demonstrated that people with existing Alzheimer's, it was a short study, 20 weeks, and a small study, 57 individuals. But they not only arrested the decline, which no drug can do, they actually led to improvement. So either stopping or improvement by 70% in 70% of their cohort without drugs. And when I say without drugs, as if there were a drug. So there isn't.
Yeah, it's so true. You keep mentioning metabolism. I don't want it to be lost on listeners that we are amid a crisis of metabolic illness today. I mean, the last numbers I saw were, dismal. 90-something% of Americans have at least one component of metabolic syndrome. What do you think is driving that?
A lot of things. I think advertising, I think mass production of food, the fact that it's cheap, the fact that it has a long shelf life, people just eating the wrong stuff. And here I am, I'm a neurologist, and we're having a discussion about what in the heck people are eating in order to keep their brain's immune system on track so they don't have Alzheimer's disease. What's up with that? Well, what's up with that is this is the front and center focus of where we are today as you and I have this discussion in neuroscience, is that it is profoundly related to our metabolism as influenced by the foods that we eat.
Also, I mean, Grain Brain came out in 2013. Brainmaker, when did Brainmaker come out?
3 years later.
3 years later. The term, now everybody seemingly is talking about ultra processed foods, right? Yeah. As if they're,
we didn't even have that term in the Grain Brain days.
Exactly. We didn't in the Genius Foods days, which came out in 2018. And now there's such, the data seems almost conclusive that by over-consuming these kinds of products, which Americans now by and large are, that they are one of the primary threats to brain health.
You're right, and it gets back to your original question. So what the heck's going on here? And we got to call it out because, to be fair, mainstream medicine isn't calling it out. They're calling out the latest drugs, these amyloid-targeting medications that we'll talk about in a moment that don't work. But you're exactly right. 60% of calories that American adults consume are in the form of ultra-processed foods. So one recent study came out that followed 1,375 people for 12.7 years, average age 67, and found that, did a food frequency questionnaire, what the heck are you eating? I found that for every serving per day as an average of ultra-processed foods, Alzheimer's risk went up 13%. And for those individuals who consume 10 or more servings as an average per day, which is a lot of people, the risk goes up 2.7-fold of a disease for which there is no pharmaceutical treatment. So and we see the same thing across the board for cardiovascular disease, for cancer risk, for breast cancer risk. And what part of this, people are thinking that, well, my genes have changed. And yeah, I guess the genes that you wear are changing for sure. They're getting larger and larger, but your DNA is changing. That's not how it works. We have the same DNA that we've had for the past 70,000 years. So it's either environment or is it evolution? It's actually the marriage of the two. And in this case, our environment, i.e. the foods that we're eating, are sending signals to our DNA that are non-salubrious, that are paving the way for inflammation, for free radical-mediated stress. And the brain's immune cells, the microglial cells, see this and they change. They go from being supportive and nurturing to being destructive. So in a very real sense, what we've just done is connected your comments about ultra-processed foods to a major shift in the brain's immune system that paves the way for destruction.
Now, is it through any one particular macronutrient? Is it through the carbs? Is it through the fat? Is it through the sugar, through the oils? Or is it through the mere fact that these foods tend to drive their own overconsumption at the end of the day?
I think both. I think everything you mentioned is playing a role. So much of what you just mentioned ultimately manifests as inflammation. And inflammation anywhere in the body can make its way to the brain, does make its way through the blood-brain barrier. And the microglial cells, the brain's immune cells, are on guard. And when they see inflammation, they change from being supportive, we call that M2, to being destructive, M1. They basically say, they turn their backs. Instead of nurturing your brain cells and nurturing your synapses, they become destructive. So they're on guard. And anything that paves the way for that inflammation, whether it is the ultra-processed foods, the higher level of processing of the carbohydrates, the inappropriate dietary fats that we consume, the free sugars, the additives, all of these things conspire to change our microglial cells. And the good news, the empowering part of what we're talking about is, okay, I get that. So maybe I shouldn't be doing these things. And take-home message here is you can revert your microglial cells back from being destructive to being supportive. That explains why the Tansey and the study done at Harvard reversing Alzheimer's in these patients was able to work.
How do you measure, is there a way, I mean, I know there are systemic biomarkers that might indicate chronic inflammation. Is there a way to measure it in the brain?
So the systemic biomarkers that you measure inflammation with are very valuable. So we do look at things like sedimentation rate and C-reactive protein, total blood sugar over time, in other words, A1C, fasting insulin levels. These are all indicators, though, of levels ultimately of inflammation. But there is a type of brain scan called TSPO. TSPO tags those microglia that are in their inflammatory state, the brain's immune cells that have shifted from being supportive to being the zombie. Now they're around destroying cells. Now that's only available as a research tool, but what I describe in the book is all of the various neurodegenerative disorders in which the TSPO scan is positive. In other words, showing these what we call M1 microglial cells, these cells in the brain that have been turned on by changes in the microbiome, by exposure to PM2.5 particles in the atmosphere, by head trauma, by glyphosate exposure. All of the things that can lead to turning on to the microglia are able to be imaged on the TSPO scan. And it's across the spectrum of neurodegenerative conditions. Any one that you could name right now, I would almost guarantee you would light up on the TSPO.
I'm glad that you brought up PM2.5. I noticed you have a quote in the book putting a spin on the colloquial, you are what you eat.
Yes,
and
you are what you breathe.
You are what you breathe. And that's one of the reasons why, every room in my house now we have a Jasper to help clean the air. But I think it's remarkable and totally underappreciated that the air that you're breathing has been increasingly linked to risk for Alzheimer's disease. It's a newly recognized modifiable risk factor per the, I believe, the 2020 Lancet
2024
Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention, and it's also increasingly being linked to Parkinson's disease.
That's right. And you generally don't smell this stuff. You don't know you're breathing it, but that particulate matter is in your air. And you would know if you're measuring your air quality, as do I, because my air purifier tells me when things are in trouble. There's a device called Atmos. It's a little handheld, connects to an app on your phone, and you can carry it around and see what is the quality of your air. And there are apps that you can get where you dial in the city that you're in right now, and it'll tell you what is the AQI, the Air Quality Index, and they break it out in terms of the various PM2.5s that you're talking about. Now, with respect to Alzheimer's risk, that was first discovered in research in Toronto that looked at what is your proximity to a major highway, the closer you live to a major highway, where PM2.5s are coming out of the car exhaust and from the tires, from the breakdown of the rubber in the tires. And it was dramatic. The closer you live, the higher your Alzheimer's risk, dramatically based on that. But I think the bigger issue today, not that that's not an issue because it is wildfire. And people don't appreciate that if there's a wildfire in a forest in Canada, well, that's their problem. Well, actually, no, it isn't. Smoke doesn't respect borders. And you can, as we saw last year, 2 years ago, wildfires in Canada were affecting the air quality index in Europe. So we all live in the same ecosystem. So it's really important, I think, to be aware of that and do exactly what you're doing here, purify your air.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, the wildfires in Los Angeles last year or 2 years ago at this
2
point.
years, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was so grateful that I had purifiers in my home. I didn't take any precaution beyond that, but I remember reading a couple of studies that were run out of, I believe it was Mexico City, where they were looking at the brains of cadavers across the age spectrum, people who'd been exposed to undue levels of air pollution. And they would see Alzheimer's-like pathology in the brains of people as young as in their teens.
That's right.
If I recall correctly.
You are recalling correctly, yeah. I mean, Mexico City is one of the most polluted cities on the planet. But I have to say, earlier this year, I was in Cairo, and it was, terrible pun, breathtaking, but it was just incredible, the level of air pollution. I mean, the AQI was as high as 350, which is, you shouldn't even be outside, regardless of whether you're wearing a mask or not. It's really amazing.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about nutrition, ultra-processed foods. I mean, we've talked ad nauseum about, their potential health risks on this show. You mentioned sleep. What's the deal with sleep?
What's the deal with sleep?
I mean, we spend a third of our lives doing it.
Yeah,
it's got to be important. But from the standpoint of brain health, why is sleep so valuable?
So, lack of restorative sleep is a powerful risk factor for brain degeneration. Maybe that's a soundbite right there, and people need to think about that, because I think there's a trend these days to, well, I want to be more productive. I'm going to stay up later and do something. Or, I'll binge watch whatever it may be, Homeland, until who knows what time. But you've got to get enough restorative sleep. You said a third of your life. It's got to be important if you're spending a third of your life doing this thing. You don't spend a third of your life eating, although I guess some people do, or exercising. I guess some people do. But, it's absolutely not a time that the brain is resting. As a matter of fact, it's cleaning itself up, as you know. You have talked about this before, that you're activating this glymphatic system to get rid of accumulated debris of the day's work. And if you don't do it, what happens the next day? These things are still around and lead to inflammation, activating your microglial cells, shifting them from being supportive brain defenders to being destructive. And who wants that? I mean, the next morning, one night of non-restorative sleep, you're making the wrong choices in terms of what you're going to eat. You have higher levels of inflammatory chemicals in your body. Your insulin sensitivity has declined. Your blood sugar has increased. Your cortisol level has gone up to threaten your microbiome. We'll get there in just a minute. So all things bad, right? So, plenty of people say, well, I know I got a good night's sleep. Well, how do you know that? Well, because I went to sleep at 10 o'clock and I woke up at 7 o'clock, so I got plenty of sleep. But what was the quality? And that's when metricizing comes into play. Get a wearable, whether it's your Whoop or your Apple Watch or your Oura Ring, whatever you wear, figure it out. And then make changes and then record the next night. Did I help myself by having caffeine no later than 2 p.m., or by shifting my exercise to the morning as opposed to the afternoon, or by not binge watching and being on the TV or using my computer or phone?
What's actually happening in the brain when you sleep?
Well, you're activating this system called the glymphatic system. And so what that is doing is it's allowing pulsations in the brain to push out into, ultimately getting into the bloodstream, these chemicals that have accumulated. You're actually reducing inflammation. You're actually, during sleep, reverting your microglia back to being supportive. And a new study just came out, interestingly, in the past couple of months, showing that even body movement is translated through the vertebral venous, the blood supply through the vertebrae, through your spine, that's transmitted to the brain, that also causes it to pulsate a little bit to actually activate the same system and help you clear debris. So it's about cleaning up. And the other things that are going on, you're consolidating your memories, you're reviewing the day's events, experiences, and those are being compared to previous experience to form new memories, more new ways of contextualizing what you experienced. So that's a process that's a little bit different than what gets all the attention, which is the lymphatic system. That's nonetheless, equally important. You're also, now that you brought it up, and then we'll quit. You're also calming down the amygdala, which is the part of the brain, the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system part of the brain. The amygdala is, with a poor night's sleep, much more active the next day, making you much less able to make better, good decisions. You're much more likely to be just impulsive, not think things through, and that relates to the food choices that you make and all of your lifestyle choices as well.
Yeah, on a night of poor sleep, you become essentially, what sleep deprivation does is it sensitizes you even further to food reward.
That's right.
To the degree that meta-analyses, I believe, have found that you are inclined to eat about 400 additional calories on average the next day, and those calories tend to come from exactly the kinds of foods that you don't want to be eating.
And while you're compromising insulin function at the same time, and what could be worse? And many of us have been through that. I mean, I remember what my food choices would be after being in the emergency room all night, and then you're having to make rounds, and where we'd go to the pediatrics floor and get baby food that was just pure sugar. That's another story, of course. And the banana beech nut baby food was the one that I don't know how many grams of sugar that had, but it was really good. So bad decision, of course.
Damn. Yeah, it's sleep.
I lived on that stuff, I got to tell you, for
really
years.
Damn. And there's a relationship between air quality and sleep quality as well. There was I believe there was a study that found that a properly ventilated room led to an improvement in sleep quality.
Yeah, and it wasn't dramatic. The amount of sleep that they gained was, I think it was around 8 minutes or something like that. But add that up over time, that becomes very significant. And it's not just the length of sleep, but when you look at quality, how much deep sleep did they get? That's when the lymphatic system is activated. So it isn't hard to create better sleep hygiene. It isn't hard to address air quality, darkness, coldness of your bed. Does your partner move? Does your partner snore? From time to time I snore, and my wife has a white noise generator, and if I wake up in the morning and that's on, I know I was snoring last night. So
I have one of those too. I can't sleep without a little bit of brown noise, actually, which is like a little bit lower in terms of its, there's like more bass in it. I don't know, something very, very comforting about.
I don't go for the waves crashing sounds.
No.
You can dial that one in,
Yeah.
I mean, I like sleeping at the beach, but the fake wave doesn't do it for me, or the rain.
Yeah. No, same. It's got to be static.
Yeah.
Essentially, which kind of dovetails into the movement aspect of the three things that you would do today if you were starting from zero. I find that I sleep better on days that I've exercised. Is that something that you find to be?
For me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I sleep well and I exercise every day. So, I mean, I don't know that it necessarily, I never not exercise. So I have never tried that. I mean, when I travel, but then you have the other variable of the fact that you're crossing time zones and all those things. But I guess that's a great segue to exercise. I mean, I can't think of that any of these is more important than the other, but that's certainly one of the most important legs of the stool. And underrated, and there's no medication on the planet that comes even close. And it's there. You got to buy a pair of sneakers and off you go.
What forms of exercise?
Well, it's been looked at. As it relates to brain health, it's the combination of both resistance and aerobic. You need both. And they target different parts of our metabolism. They target blood supply, they target nitric oxide, such that your blood vessels are working better, can expand more. They target things like AMP kinase or metabolism. We know that strength training is a great way of targeting your metabolism, keeping your blood sugar in check, helping you burn body fat, not just because you're burning calories, but actually shifting metabolism over to helping you burn your body fat. And it also, as we know, helps with our mitochondrial function. It helps us not only get rid of mitochondria that are defective, mitophagy, but grow new mitochondria. We call it mitochondrial biogenesis. That's important because in the shift of the brain's immune cells, which is what this is about, brain defenders, it's the shift in their mitochondria that dictates whether they're going to be supportive or destructive. So at the end of the, or beginning of the day, however you want to look at it, it's our mitochondria and how they're functioning that really plays the central role in whether our brains are going to be around for us, along for the ride or not. And it's how the mitochondria influence whether the M1 or M2 cells predominate.
And what would you say are the biggest needle movers when it comes to supporting mitochondrial health?
The biggest needle movers, I think that's a tough call. Certainly exercise is very important, but I think at the same time, it's what do we want to avoid? There are plenty of mitochondrial toxins that are ubiquitous in our environment now. And I'll just call it like it is. I think glyphosate is a huge issue. I think in America now we're using less glyphosate than we had in terms of, the amount that's used is not increasing as rapidly as it was. Why? Because more of the crops are becoming Roundup resistant. Actually, it's not the crops, it's the weeds that are modifying their genomes. And now we're using more paraquat. And paraquat is an herbicide that is a mitochondrial toxin that is used in the laboratory to create Parkinson's disease in primates that we are putting on our food, a mitochondrial toxin. Something's very wrong with that. Leave that for the moment. Let's light the single candle and not curse the darkness so much, but I think people have to be aware that these things are happening. So I think it's the idea of recognizing where these mitochondrial toxins are all around us and how ultimately so many of the things that we are exposed to stress-wise ultimately threaten the mitochondria. So what can we do to offset that? We describe it. How do we avoid these toxins? But how do we augment our mitochondria? We use supplements like urolithin and coenzyme Q10 and healthy levels of essential fatty acids to build the platform on which mitochondria are able to make energy through electron transport. But the point I really want to make is that what differentiates the destructive microglial cell, what I call the evil twin, from the supportive M2 brain defender microglial cell is whether the mitochondria are working or not. In the destructive microglia, mitochondria are failing, and we use something else, another energy-producing system called glycolysis, which is incredibly less efficient. So, at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, depending on your perspective, it's all about energy and metabolism.
Yeah, I just want to, flag for listeners that you've always been so early to these topics. I remember reading a blog on your website about paraquat a decade ago at this point, and its connection, the stark connection that it had that nobody at the time was talking about to Parkinson's disease. And I know you and I both have become acquainted with and have helped support the work of Dr. Ray Dorsey, who's a neurologist whose work I just adore, and I've had him on the podcast many times in the past, and who's doing really important work with regards to advocating for greater awareness around these kinds of environmental toxicants. But there's so much industry backing and obfuscation of the data. It's
obfuscation, to be kind, right?
To be kind, yeah. But you were so early to raising awareness about these chemicals.
Yeah, I remember there are two mitochondrial toxins that are used in the herbicide-pesticide world called Maneb and Mancozeb. And at the time I was writing about that, they were being sold online for your vegetable garden. And they are used in rodent models to create Parkinson's. Yeah, it's crazy. And God bless a guy like Ray Dorsey for getting out there and writing 2 books now on what he calls Parkinson's being a man-made disease, and it is. One of the things that how I entree that part in this book, and he's talked about as well, is there was a Dr. J. William Langston who in 1982 was 82? Yes, it was 1982. Was working at Stanford, and it was actually 1988, sorry. And I'm just looking at the article now, and it was in 88. So he's working as a professor at Stanford, and the residents came knocking on his door. You got to come down to the ER right away. There's a person down there. We don't know if he should go to the psych service or be admitted to neurology. And so he said, well, tell me, what's wrong with the guy? He's stuck. His arm is stuck in the air and he can't bring it down. Is that a psychiatric problem? Probably. Or is it neurological? I've never seen it before. So Dr. Langston goes down, sees the patient in the ER, tries to bring the arm down. He was able to bring it down, but it takes a lot of effort. He says, hey, never seen anything like this before. And how was he yesterday? Oh, he was fine yesterday. Now he's got this problem. And within a few weeks, more patients came in. Same thing. And so what he determined, interesting story, is that these people were all IV drug abusers, and they had they bought a drug on the street from one source that was contaminated with something called MPTP. And what is MPTP? So it's a mitochondrial toxin. And 13 years later, one of these patients died, and Dr. Langston had the ability an opportunity to examine the brain. And what he found was, this sets the stage for everything. It's incredible that the MPTP had caused the microglial cells in a particular part of the brain, the substantia nigra that makes the dopamine. It caused the microglial cells to digest away those neurons so they couldn't make dopamine anymore. And they were still acting 13 years later from the one exposure. And that set the stage for using MPTP as a research tool, but for us to understand the role of the brain's immune system in brain degeneration.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty cool story.
And that's obviously not the only mitochondrial toxin that exists. There
Lots
are
of them
innumerable.
Around. Yeah.
Have you looked at all into the research on nicotine? Do you have any thoughts on nicotine as a potential neuroprotectant agent?
Yes. In fact, interestingly, I just wrote a blog on that topic. And I think all in all, there's pretty good positive evidence that nicotine may have its upsides. That may surprise you, but I think that the problem is that it's highly addictive, and that's not insignificant. So I did not include nicotine, though I had reviewed it for this book, but I think it's something we should continue to watch.
Yeah, there are cardiorespiratory downsides for sure, but it's very interesting as a potential antioxidant, if you will, in the brain, with trade-offs, of course.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Is there a healthy habit that you see people doing regularly that might actually be hurting their brains?
That's sort of how could it be healthy?
Healthy in air quotes.
Okay, healthy in air quotes that people think they're doing. I think there is a tendency for people to overdo their exercise. You go to the gyms and you see people there, really doing a lot of workout for, way too much time. And I think it really depends on the individual. If you were to ask me, well, how much is a good extension of your exercise program over a period of a week? And I would say, average person, depending on their level of fitness, maybe around 180 minutes is sort of the sweet spot. So I think there are people who want to lose weight quickly and they've paid for their gym membership. They're going to get the most out of it. And I think you can overdo that. And then you increase production of inflammatory mediators, you increase cortisol, and diminishing return.
Yeah, it's one of those stressors that there's a U-shaped curve where some is...
It's exactly a U-shaped curve. The other thing is, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but the smoothie. The smoothie is, it's a smoothie, so it's got to be good for me. But sometimes there's a lot of stuff put into that smoothie that really, let's look at the number of grams of sugar that went into that came from, the number of bananas or whatever you put in that smoothie. So people have a tendency, and I hope I'm not being rude here, to think that it doesn't really matter what goes in. As long as it's a smoothie, that's a good thing because it's now a smoothie. The other thing I think is people think is really good for them that may not be is juicing. And that's going to raise some eyebrows as well. But when you use a standard juicing machine, you throw out all the fiber. And that's about the worst thing you can do. You need that fiber. So eat the fruit or vegetable. That's what you really ought to be doing. And the idea that fruit juice in and of itself is a good thing, well, no, it isn't. Orange juice, apple juice, that's 32 grams of sugar in a 12-ounce glass. It's the same as drinking a Coke. So, that's not how you would get fruit juice in nature. You would eat the whole fruit.
What about juicing vegetables? That seems like it would be more benign, right? Because there's not as much sugar.
I think if you put them in some kind of machine, and we know there's several of them out there, that will give you the fiber as well. That's the ticket. There's no problem with that.
Yeah. No, the smoothie thing is interesting because fruit is healthy. Like there's, people now on social media, like you'll find somebody willing to fearmonger anything in the name of clicks and cachet on Instagram. But there is some merit to the fact that when you puree fruit and you compress whole fruit into a beverage that you can drink, within minutes, that it increases the likelihood that you're going to overconsume fruit. I mean, fruit still contains calories, and if I recall correctly, like one of the seminal studies to flag, to sound the alarm on ultra-processed foods, the Kevin Hall NIH study, speed of eating. One of the hallmark features of ultra-processed foods that make them so pernicious from the standpoint of health is that we're able to eat them so rapidly relative to minimally processed whole foods.
Yeah, and that overwhelms the small intestine's ability to absorb glucose, or sugar rather. And they ultimately raise glucose through the process of increasing uric acid. So when we have fruit sugar or fructose delivered to the small intestine slowly, as when one eats an apple for 5 grams of sugar, then there's fiber in there. It slows your absorption. And you can't consume an apple that quickly as you could down a glass of apple juice. When you're exposing your small intestine to that much sugar that quickly, it overwhelms the ability of to deal with it, and that excess fructose then ultimately becomes uric acid, and uric acid is threatening mitochondrial function. As a protective mechanism, we deal with fructose in a way that is really harkens back to our ancestry. That dietary fructose comes from ripened fruit by and large. And when is fruit ripe? It's ripe at in the fall. And so we eat fruit in the fall to get the fructose to trigger uric acid to help us make body fat and reduce mitochondrial function so that we burn less energy so we can survive. That's a survival mechanism for our hunter-gatherer ancestors. But nowadays, we're preparing for winter 365 days a year. That never comes. Winter being the time of food scarcity. So we are activating this ancestral life-preserving process of fructose targeting us to make more body fat and raise our blood sugar in a way that isn't serving us now. So it's this environmental evolutionary mismatch.
And it also short circuits like satiety mechanisms. Like you're consuming a 600-calorie fruit smoothie. Like there's no way that your brain's going to register those 600 calories in the time that it takes to consume that Jamba Juice.
It's amazing how much sugar can be in these products. I was giving a lecture at an event years ago, and I was talking about the upside of drinking coffee. And I said, and it doesn't mean one of these something chino, whatever they're called. I think it had 86 grams of sugar. And well, you said coffee's good, right?
Yeah. And it's not even just it's not the coffee, it's not even the Jamba Juice or the Frappuccino. It's like you can go to Erewhon right now and get a smoothie, and the people are lining up to get, by the way, and they can contain anywhere from 300, 400, 500, 600 calories, and you consume it within minutes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, again, that's why I brought up smoothie. So there's a so-called healthy air quotes habit that people, I think, need to reassess. That's for sure.
You're kind of like the Ray Kurzweil of holistic health.
Wow, that's a huge compliment.
Yeah, I feel like because mean, Grain Brain came out. We weren't yet at that point talking about ultra processed foods, but you were at that point sounding the alarm on refined grains and added sugars and things like that. And then Brain Maker came out, which was all about the microbiome. We were still a couple years before the microbiome becoming a household term, which it now is. Do you feel like microglia is going to be something that, obviously that's the topic of your new book, which people should check out, Brain Defenders, but do you think that this is something that 3, 4, 5 years from now, everybody's going to be talking about?
Sooner. And it's being propelled by two things. First, the abject failure of drugs to treat these problems. And second, the research in terms of pharmaceutical intervention targeting microglial cells that I think is going to be hugely effective. And let me add a third being the fact that we can control our microglia right now as we sit here. So we have the tools. We've covered some of them already. But don't be surprised that tech is involved here big time, looking at reprogramming the microglia, at transplanting mitochondria, at transplanting microglia into the human brain already being done.
How can they possibly do something like that?
They grow microglial cells from progenitor cells, and then they just instill them into the spinal fluid. It's already went from rodent study 5 years ago to human intervention last year for a particular neurodegenerative condition, and it worked really it was a universally fatal disease, and it was effective. So that's where we are. But the tools here are things that you have, most of them. Some of them are forward thinking. We don't have just yet, but we will.
What is the most surprising aspect of this microglial science?
For me, the most surprising, I think, and rewarding aspect of it is it converges everything I've talked about and studied for 40 years into one understanding, upstream of everything. One lens to see everything through that really explains absolutely why everything we've been talking about, why the diet we described in grain brain, what's the role of the microbiome, everything that we've talked about converges on being seen through the lens of our brain's immune cells and now makes sense. So I would have asked you, why do diabetics have as much as type 2, a threefold increased risk of Alzheimer's? Well, glycation of proteins, inflammation, lack of insulin functionality. Okay, but primarily when our metabolism is that disrupted, it threatens the microbiome. All of these things. Why is sleep related? Why are the PM 2.5s related? Why is, why are all of these inroads that we've talked about? How do they converge? And now we know.
It's fascinating. So for somebody listening to this who feels as though their brain isn't working quite the way that it used to, maybe they're struggling with brain fog, low energy, what are the 3 steps that they should take today?
Well, step 1 is embrace the fact that you are the architect of your brain's destiny. So embrace the fact that the ball's in your court and it's time. And B, maybe it won't be 3, but B, A and B, we'll go shift away from numbers. B, the idea that the ball is definitely in your court. There's no one else yet able to do it. This idea of live your life however you feel like you want to, and then hoping for a magic bullet, silver bullet, is not realistic and is not certainly anything we can embrace right now. If there were a drug that worked, you would have used it for your mother, and I would have used it for my father, and I would have written the prescription and done it. But there was nothing, and there to this day, he's been gone 13 years. I would have done it then. I would do it now. But I do have hope as it relates to the pharmaceutical world, especially, strangely, as it relates to GLP-1 agonist drugs. Who knew? Talk about it in the book. Yeah, I mean, there's already been some pretty powerful research that I think there's a light on the horizon here as it relates to pharmaceutical intervention. But I think that, let's target your age group. Let's target people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, such that first they understand that the seeds for Alzheimer's are sown in your age group. That's when the metabolic issues begin to take root. And that either opens the door or closes the door as it relates to any number of brain degenerative situations. So I think it's beyond looking at how much exercise you're getting in sleep and what you're eating. Let's metricize. So what are the players? I want to know your blood sugar. I don't want to know your annual fasting blood sugar at your doctor's visit. That's almost useless. I want to know what it's doing dynamically over time, i.e. wear a continuous glucose monitor, not for the rest of your life, but wear it for a couple of weeks and report back to me, or report back to yourself. Look at the data, see what you're showing. Look at your fasting insulin level. Look at your A1C. That's almost the entire battle as far as I'm concerned. Because everything we've talked about will weigh in on that part of your metabolism, which is incredibly important as it relates to your brain.
And what about anthropometrics like, waist circumference?
Totally important.
Body fat percentage.
All percent. I often say one of the most technologically advanced instruments that we have for measuring just what you talked about is called a tape measure. A tape measure. Hard to pronounce, right? Buy a tape measure. Your scale is interesting. But as you look at your scale in relation to your height, now you're talking about BMI, and that is not as valuable as we thought it had been in years gone by, based upon your level of fat versus muscularity, for example. I think the tape measure looking at waist to hip ratio is far more effective and as simple can be. It doesn't have to be hard. But as you're talking about all of these other metrics, they filter through ultimately inflammation and regulation of blood sugar. Those are the keys that threaten the mitochondria and threaten your microglial cells.
As a neurologist focused on prevention and one who's written extensively about nutrition over the past few decades, what are your thoughts on creatine?
Oh, it's fundamental. And I describe it in the book. Creatine, it's cheap. It's tasteless. There's hardly anyone who can't take creatine except for perhaps people with renal disease, renal failure. But there's no reason not to take creatine. You're aware of a study from last year of interventional trial using 10 grams twice a day, showing significant changes in individuals with Alzheimer's disease that were positive. Existing Alzheimer's disease improvement, results better than any pharmaceutical that targets beta amyloid, for example, which didn't have really any effect. I mentioned this before we started recording, this Cochrane analysis that was released about a month ago that reviewed 17 studies looking at the drugs that remove this beta amyloid from the brain. 17 studies, 20,342 individuals, 18-month studies, and their word was the effectiveness is trivial. They don't work, and yet there's about a 25% risk of brain hemorrhage or brain swelling. So, that's what we're up against. That is a gold standard evaluation of the very best research saying this drug that is FDA approved for use here in America at $40,000 a year per patient is doing very little more than increasing their risk for severe problems and brain atrophy, I might add.
Yeah, and then a compound like creatine, it might not have drug-like effects, and we certainly need more research on it in the setting of neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease. But I mean, it's very safe. We've got like decades of safety records at this point, at least in young and healthy people. Remains to be seen if that is the case in older people. But in this trial that you're talking about, if I recall correctly, there were no adverse events.
Right.
And it's cheap, it's widely available, and if it moves the needle, I mean, that's incredible.
It's not the home run. I mean, we've got to approach brain health from multiple inroads, but it's huge. And again, for all the right reasons. If somebody had if it were proprietary and available as a prescription, my neurology colleagues would absolutely, based on the research, would be recommending it. And rightly so.
Yeah. You were also very early with regards to advocating on behalf of the egg. I remember you were in my documentary. You're in my documentary, Little Empty Boxes, which, shameless plug, people should definitely check out, which we filmed over 10 years ago. And I remember you were referred to the egg as the dreaded egg.
Did I not cook you eggs for breakfast? Did I not make you an omelet one day? I think I overcooked it a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Those videos are on my YouTube channel. People can check it out. I went down to visit David in his home in Naples, Florida, and he cooked me a brain-healthy breakfast, and it was comprised of eggs, which is something
and coffee.
Eggs and coffee.
Yeah. It's a little bit Spartan there, but it works. No, as a matter of fact, a study just came out a couple of weeks ago saying that even one egg per day is associated with a significant reduced risk of Alzheimer's. And why? I mean, everybody wants to know, well, what's the thing? And let's extract the thing from eggs. Well, it's got good fat, it's got good protein, but I think a lot of the interest is in the choline. So eggs contain choline like walnuts and strawberries. So maybe that, if you must know the active ingredient, eat the egg. Don't worry about it,
Don't worry about it.
And don't worry about the heart risk. We've seen that proven not to be the case.
Yeah, eggs were, when was it, 2020? They were no longer, at that point, a nutrient of concern per our dietary guidelines, if I recall correctly.
And you still see the egg white omelet on the menu, right? On the healthy menu.
On the healthy menu.
There's a healthy menu on the menu, and then there's the normal food. And then there's the worst food on the menu, which is the kids' menu. You ever notice that? Those are the chicken nuggets and the fries and the ketchup. That's what the kids should eat. Why?
Yeah. No.
Now, we don't need them to worry about their school performance because you're giving them brain unhealthy foods.
What a paradox. I enjoy egg whites because of just the raw protein concentration of egg whites, but I love whole eggs because of their nutrient value, their nutrient density.
The darker the yolk, the better.
There you go. And the harder the shell.
Yeah, I've often wondered, this is way off topic, but why don't we do something with the shell?
Grind it up?
Yeah, we used to do that with our dogs. We'd put in their dog food.
Because they're so mineral rich, right?
We should do something. We should write a menu, a dietary book on eating eggshells.
Speaking of unsung heroes in the world of food and brain health, higher cheese consumption has been linked to a lower risk of dementia. What do you make of that study?
It was interesting, and I think again, the default was, well, what are the active ingredients? And active ingredient. Why would that higher fat cheese consumption be related to brain health? And I think the default was higher levels of vitamin K2, and the fact that there were multiple things conspiring in cheese. I wrote about it. I thought it was a great idea.
Yeah,
and I've always been a cheese eater.
Yeah, what's not to like?
Yeah,
you also. I think early on, you might have spoken disparagingly about honey, but then you changed your perspective on that, which is one of my favorite.
Who helped you with this? ChatGPT? Where do you get all this?
Because I follow you.
You are right. You're absolutely right.
Yes, I follow you.
No, I think I wrote a blog saying I may have been wrong about honey.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I came clean with that one.
You did.
So, honey is pure sugar, and it's very high in fructose. But it turns out, the issue with fructose, I alluded to it earlier, is ultimately the metabolism leads to higher levels of uric acid. That's what I wrote Drop Acid about, dropping your uric acid. But honey doesn't do that. So I can't say that it's something we should be eating a lot of, but, I'm not as down on it as I had been in the past. So, people say, yeah, but you once said that we should be on a low-fat diet. Yeah, I did say that 30 years ago. But now you've changed. How can you change your opinion? That's what you want. You want thought leaders, if that's what I am, to be able to change their opinion and to change their opinions based upon what current science is revealing. And they're revealing things that we hadn't anticipated before. Like honey might not be so bad for us.
And that's the hallmark of a truly scientific thinker, somebody who follows the evidence and is has strong opinions loosely held. And is willing
strong opinions loosely held. Okay.
Yeah, is willing to pivot when new, stronger data emerges. So are there any other areas where you might have changed your mind? I mean, you were one of the early, you were very early, based on the science of Dr. Alessio Fasano, who's also in my documentary, another shameless plug, talking about the potential link between gluten consumption and various brain health outcomes. Is gluten something that you still avoid, or is it something that you now have a more moderate view on?
It is. And do I avoid gluten 100%? I do not. Am I gluten sensitive? I don't think so. But based on Dr. Fasano's work, knowing that gluten can in fact induce gut permeability in a lot of people, if not everyone to some degree, I think it's best to reduce gluten. Certainly, if you have celiac disease, you will avoid it completely. Or you have what he termed non-celiac gluten sensitivity. That was a term that was validated in the Journal of the American Medical Association. He began using it years ago. And I think if you find that that's, you're in that camp, then by all means, reduce or avoid consumption completely. So there was a Dr. Marius Hadjivassiliou.
Gesundheit.
Yeah. He's British. So he wrote a book about, or actually several papers about neurological issues as a consequence of gluten exposure in non-celiac patients. Again, justifying our description of non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And they weren't, trivial issues. They were mood disorders and even movement disorders, and certainly a headache. And I read his papers, and that was really a very strong impetus for writing Grain Brain. Because I was seeing this in my office. I was seeing patients, and I'd say, hey, let's take you off of gluten. I know you don't have celiac disease, but let's take you off and see what happens. And it was remarkable. I remember one time I had a woman with chronic, terrible migraine headaches requiring narcotics. And she'd been to various headache clinics. And I said, let's try going gluten-free. What the heck, right? We didn't have really good studies back then. We had tissue transglutaminase and things like that for celiac, but we didn't really have any good marker for gluten sensitivity except for an avoidance diet. So 6 weeks later, she came back. Headaches are gone. I said, great, that's wonderful. And she said, I'm going to stay gluten-free. I said, great. Anyway, here's the good part of the story. So she had a gastroenterologist, and she mentioned to her gastroenterologist because she had been seeing a gastroenterologist. I wonder why. I mean, she probably had GI issues from gluten, and had her follow-up appointment. And she said, by the way, my headaches, which have been devastating for so many years, I've gone gluten-free, and they're gone. And he said, that's ridiculous. We're going to do an upper endoscopy and look at your, to see if you have celiac disease or not. Well, she didn't have villus atrophy of her, intestine. He said, you don't have celiac disease. That recommendation is ridiculous. Go back and eat gluten. And so she did. What happens?
Migraines came back.
You bet, with a vengeance. And so I think we have to realize that many more people, perhaps as many as 70% of Americans, have at least some level of gluten sensitivity. So, that's what Dr. Fasano talked about many years ago, which was the support that I needed to indicate in the book that, hey, if you're having, kind of these strange neurological issues, in addition to seeing your doctor or take the medication recommended, whatever, try going gluten-free, see what happens.
Yeah, I would say that I still, to this day, maintain a relatively low gluten diet, but I do eat it occasionally. You put a good piece of sourdough, freshly baked sourdough in front of me, I'm going to go ham on it. But I ever since voraciously consuming your content, looking into the data, having conversations with Dr. Fasano, it's just shifted my thinking about it more as something to dose intentionally, if you will.
I hear you.
As opposed to just, like what I think is the norm today. It's just like a gluten-free for all, every meal, every snack.
But ask yourself, how is gluten normally delivered? I mean, you can talk about, a certain sourdough bread or whatever it may be, but by and large, gluten is found in the context of crap. I mean, it's, you go down the gluten-free aisle, think, home free, I eat whatever I want in this aisle, and it's awful.
Yeah.
It's food that's so high in sugar and preservatives and, modified grains in such a way that they raise your blood sugar. So there's nothing magic about being in the gluten-free aisle. And how cool that you had Dr. Fasano on the podcast. He's great.
Yeah, and you're completely right. Like gluten-free products can be even worse for you actually than regular wheat-based products. So that is definitely an important caveat.
I put an anecdote about Dr. Fasano in the book, and here's the anecdote. We were lecturing in Australia, and we went to an opera, and I said, would you like to go with us? My wife and I got him a ticket, and I think we brought, so we went, and one other doctor, and it was La Traviata, and so he was on my left, my wife was on my right, and Mark Houston was the other doctor, and so he sang every word of La Traviata, didn't miss a beat. What a Renaissance man,
Alessio
Oh,
Fasano,
yeah.
he's
It was great.
operatic singer.
Well, he was, respectfully, Alessio, if you're watching, it wasn't operatic, but he was singing along.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I think that you're the man, and I'm super grateful for your time and your wisdom, and I passionately follow your work, and I have for years. So thank you for continuing to be at the vanguard of this crucially important science, a science that is personally relevant to me, and I know it is to you. And I implore people to check out Brain Defenders and pick it up.
Well, thank you. And I will say, in the world of citizen scientists, you are at the top of the list. So, I think people need to recognize that about you, that, here you are with this incredible knowledge base now as it relates to the brain, by having the circumstance that you went through. And, not everybody does that. And certainly nobody does it to the level that you've done it. And the outreach is, the word doctor means teacher, and that's what you're doing. So it's so valuable, and I'm so grateful that you do what you do.
Thank you, David. You're the man. And also, fantastic guitar player, in case there are people out there that don't know this about you.
Uh-oh.
Very talented musician in your own right.
Thank you.
Yes. One last question for you, but before we get to that, where can people pick up your new book, and where can they follow you on social media? And I also know that you have your own podcast too, so drop that.
Well, we should do one more plug for your movie.
Oh, yeah.
Shamelessly. My book is Brain Defenders, and oddly enough, the website is braindefenders.com. And that's a good place to start. The book's available everywhere. It's being published in 16 countries, actually. And the podcast is Dr. Perlmutter, drperlmutter.com. New website launches in 2 weeks, so I'm very excited about that.
Amazing. Super exciting. Yeah. And my movie is called Little Empty Boxes. David is fantastic in it. He introduces me to the wild and wacky world of kimchi. We go shopping in an upstate New York supermarket.
I remember that.
If I recall correctly, where I got in trouble for some reason. I forget what.
I think we both did. I think we were eating in a place where we shouldn't have eaten or something like that.
Something like that.
And it was a terrible thing that we did. And we were looking at each other like, we're just eating some kimchi.
Yeah. But we got some great footage out of it. And the movie is it's a project that was 10 years in the making. And yeah, my entire heart and soul, so many hours of blood, sweat, and tears and production went into it. And you can watch it on Amazon Prime, Apple TV, and YouTube itself. So check it out, littleemptyboxes.com. And of course, check out Brain Defenders and follow David's work. Last question that gets us everybody on the show. What does living a genius life mean to you?
I think living a genius life means first identifying what your special skill is. What is your superpower? And then exploiting it as best you can, as the most you can. And you're doing that. I mean, you've identified that you have this presence and this knowledge base and ability to communicate, and now you're exploiting it. So that's the genius life.
Thank you so much, David. That means a lot. Thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones that you think may benefit from it. Pay it forward and sending love. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.